I'm Christanne Orton. I'm the CTO and co-founder of 17 Ways. Like many of you, I have a background in corporate America. I worked at Hewlett Packard for a long time. And then I actually worked with, I was an entrepreneur in residence with the federal government, and really explored ways to use, human empathy to design better products and to build better businesses, and for the government to be more innovative and deliver better services. So that's my background.
Great. And so nice to see everybody. What a wonderful group.
Yeah.
It's amazing. So I'm Ann Chambers, and I'm with Christanne, co-founder of 17 Ways. And it's fun to see Lynn Carpenter on the call here, because Lynn was at the original meeting where as a group of B Corps got together, and we were asking the question, how can we work together better? And that inspired the platform that we originally built, which was to make it easy for impact companies to find each other and do business together. And that was quite a long time ago. And now we look at helping enterprise, big companies work with their suppliers to understand the supplier impact. And we'll get more into that, obviously, as we go forward. So kind of the basics of ESG, sort of to level set. I know everyone here knows, but let's just talk about it, because June, you made such a good point that very often people focus on the E in ESG and not the S and the G. But the social is so important. So ESG is really a framework for looking at how organizations it allows stakeholders to look at organizations' approach to environment, social, and governance criteria. It's a framework which doesn't have any consistency. Everyone looks at it quite differently, unfortunately, but that's moving along. So the other point I'd like to make is that I think currently people are really using sustainability and ESG pretty much interchangeably. So that language is, you'll hear people talk about sustainability, but what they mean sometimes is the whole ESG, the whole spectrum of ESG.
Can you talk a little bit more about what the S and G, what fits underneath that? Because I think there's sometimes a lack of clarity about that.
Yeah, so the S generally is a lot of employee issues. I think of it as people, right? So it's how companies, what their benefits are for employees, how they treat employees. It gets into community. It gets into worker issues, which I think someone talked about earlier. And then Christanne, do you want to jump in with your thoughts on that?
Yeah, one of the things that I really liked is, I don't know if you guys saw, PayPal did something, and I think it was last year, where they said, we're going to make sure everybody in the company makes at least enough to have 20% disposable income left over. And so that squarely hits on the S part. Most companies are just sort of focused on do no harm. They were actually looking at how can we do better for our employees. And that's where I think there's a huge opportunity for companies to really impact S. And then you want to talk about G a bit? Yeah.
Yeah, which covers cybersecurity, data, setting goals, keeping commitments. The governance piece of it.
I also think representation of women in C-suites and on boards kind of fits in there too.
And minorities.
I was just about to bring that up. In fact, we work with the Women Business Collaborative, and they're so great and focused on gender issues and making sure that women are represented on boards, women have access to capital. It's really, really important issues.
Okay. Thank you. So, I've been thinking and saying recently that I think that ESG, there's no clarity around how to measure it. Mm-hmm. There's been some talk recently that ESG investments are not returning. Well, yeah, there's no clear metrics, right? But I do believe that in the very near future, I think that ESG is going to add measurable value to the bottom line on the balance sheets of companies, right? I actually think that if they're not thinking about it now, accountants should be thinking about how do we pull out a line to show the ESG value, right, on the balance sheet that is separate from the goodwill line, which has like brand value and other things, everything else that you can't, that's not measured on the other lines thrown in there, right? And the thing is, I think what's really exciting and interesting is because you have a fuller ESG view, you have the potential to help companies to understand this value that they can put. I mean, it goes beyond just saying, we're going to be net zero by like 2030, right? And what the heck is net zero if you're buying carbon credits, right?
Right. Oh,
So
yeah, June, I think you're making a really good point. I mean, on the one hand, we want to get it so that it's so mainstream that we don't have to do a line item like that. But in the shorter term, Deloitte did a study that showed that in terms of ESG ratings, if a company increases their ESG ratings by 10 points, that can increase their enterprise value by as much as 1.2 times. And that's against peers. If a company has a great rating already and they increase it by 10 points, that can increase their value by 1.8%, which is, or 1.8 times, which is incredible. And
yeah,
we
almost
saw,
double.
yeah, it's amazing. We saw recently, just a few months ago, when Tesla got off the list of the S&P ESG, that they, because of the working conditions, and because of the crashes, their valuation dropped. I think it was 8% also was the estimate. So yeah.
And you talk about that, drivers for value creation. Do you want to go through those?
Yeah, absolutely. There's generally, or I look at it as 5 drivers. One is top line growth, which you're going to get just from B2B customers, B2C customers who are looking for sustainable solutions. Another one is cost reductions that can come from simply, using less energy consumption is a great one. Productivity definitely goes up as a company really embraces ESG. Productivity goes up because employees are so much happier. And when you're really focused on ESG, you grow your reputation and start to attract the very best talent. So your productivity is going to go up overall. For that reason, you can have regulatory benefits. Government subsidies are friendlier to companies that are in line with ESG, and then also stronger investments due to allocating capital. Again, Lynn can speak to this even more, I think, when we get to our conversation back and forth. But when you're allocating capital for long-term sustainable impact, you're just going to be in a better position.
Actually, maybe we'll take a moment. Lynn, do you want to jump in? And Zarin, I notice you're unmuting. I can only see some of you. Do you guys want to talk about the investment side of it? Because I think investors increasingly are looking for better ways to understand where the ESG value is in their investments and their portfolios, right?
Yeah, actually, there was a very nice discussion for a few days in Matt Levine's column published on Bloomberg. He was looking at how if ESG managers are putting their own money, are they getting better ESG scores? And then he found out they were not. So would the agreement be if ESG managers are putting their own money, are they deviating from ESG? And then on subsequent days, he said when they looked at the data more, they were not these people who really take ESG very seriously. They don't just focus on ESG traditional scoring, but how ESG data is used more. So they made another analysis and found that people use, just rather than very traditional ESG scores, which are debated actually how you measure them, that they were using the raw data and data scoring. So I thought that was interesting from investor point of view.
Lynn, do you want to say
Yeah,
something?
I would just comment. So my work is all in the private markets. And what we know is that, and Anne, actually, this would be kind of interesting if you guys can all incorporate this, but right, public companies in particular have set their own goals. And so as they make acquisitions, are those companies going to help or hurt their own goals? And so they are now really starting to focus on the ESG aspects, mostly E, but we try and emphasize that culture is imperative. And if you bring two cultures together that are very different, that will not help create value. So that's not in either party's best interest. So it's trying to understand the culture aspect as well. But certainly on the E side, they're much more focused on how is this particular acquisition going to help or hurt our own goals. And then certainly on the private equity side, there's some top-down pressures coming from limited partners that are starting to ask more traditional private equity funds, how are you incorporating ESG metrics into your process, your own investment process? It's still early days and it's mostly anecdotal, but the pressure is beginning.
And I've been in investor-only rooms where I've heard LPs say, we are taking a closer look. And in this economy, we're especially looking at managing partners of funds and asking them, how are you dealing with the ESG side of things? So I think that's very interesting. I want to shift a little bit because Lynn, you mentioned this is mostly in private markets right now. But Anne and Christiane, you've been seeing this certainly in your pilots in public corporations as well. So if you could talk about sort of the kind of work and pilot you've been doing, initial piloting you've been doing with corporations and sort of what you're seeing the corporate issues are.
Christiane?
Yeah, I can take that. And I mean, Lynn makes a really good point. A lot of companies are finding that 80+% of their ESG impact comes from their suppliers. I used to work at Hewlett Packard. Theirs is like 90%. I was on a Wall Street Journal sustainability forum last week, and Victoria from Bristol Myers Squibb said that theirs was above 90%, and which is pretty true for all pharmaceuticals. So it's becoming really apparent that just looking at our own operations isn't going to work. And then there's all sorts of regulations, as you all know. It's actually more regulated over in the EU than here in the US, but it's coming. So we've been working with companies to really look at, okay, what would that look like? What would sustainable procurement look like? If we were to bring ESG into our purchasing decisions, and we can actually say, what would it look like to actually use our dollars, our spending dollars to do good? We've helped them do an assessment of their suppliers. We actually, I noticed there was somebody from the UN, we use the UN Sustainable Development Goals as our North Star. And I'll tell you why. ESG does a good job of measuring kind of that do no harm. You know, what are the things that I'm doing to make sure that I'm, you know, I've in the past not done anything bad, or I'm meeting my goals from a G perspective. But SDGs really looks at where do we want to go next? What's the positive impact that we want to have in the world? And so 17 Ways gets our name from the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. So we're helping the companies that we're working with say, okay, if we use those 17 Sustainable Development Goals, what positive impact are our suppliers having in the world? How does that align with our ESG goals? You know, again, this is the environmental or the buyer, and how can we help them improve? How can we actually help them systematically improve, especially for preferred suppliers, right? I don't want to give up my favorite suppliers and they're doing nothing for ESG. So how do I actually help them get better and do a better job of this?
So what we're doing is letting them actually compare their suppliers based on their impact with our comparison tool that we've built. And one of the reasons, as Christine said, that we use the SDGs is that they're so much easier for smaller companies. ESG is intimidating generally for smaller companies and for suppliers. So we find that the SDGs, if we say, take a look at the 17 SDGs, pick 2 to 3 of these, it really lets them start to doing. A lot of times companies are doing wonderful things, but they're not taking credit for it. Once they start to look at it through a different lens, they can start to tell the stories of what they're doing, which then engages not only their employees in a much bigger way, but also their customers in a bigger way.
Yeah, I mean, and it's an on-ramp, right? I mean, think about it in terms of so many companies are just intimidated by ESG. They're like, I don't have time for this. We need to give them, our belief is we really need to give them an on-ramp, a way to get started in the sustainability conversation. The gentleman from Utah, we worked with a great marketing services company in Salt Lake City who was like, we're doing nothing, but we found that they were doing a whole bunch around good health and well-being, which is SDG 3. They were actually helping not only their employees live better lives, but they were taking that and putting it out in the community. They were, leading talks and going out and actually building that. They were helping other marketing services companies, so they were contributing to their industry. How can we actually help, rise all boats?
So there's a question in the chat from Nico. How do you differentiate and compete with the likes of Avetta and EcoVadis? What customer insights, challenges did you discover that these vendors don't address?
I'm not as familiar with Avetta as EcoVadis. So those systems are really built for, sustainability teams. They're really built for, how do we dig deep into, actually collecting data that we're going to feed into our CSR. They're not friendly to your average buyer. We're working with your average buyer, right? Who is somebody who's like, I just need to buy some services to help me kick off this event, or I need to, look at my suppliers and we worked with Ben and Jerry's, get better chocolate, get more sustainable chocolate. Those people want a consumer-like buying kind of experience that allows them to, as Anne was saying, compare different vendors and be able to see the positive impact that they're having in the world and pick the ones that are aligned with the impact the company wants to have. They don't want to dive into data about, carbon, whatever, right? They don't want to go there. And I'll just say that doesn't, I don't want to denigrate the work that Avetta and EcoVadis are doing. Theirs is absolutely crucial. We see this as a way to integrate, right? I mean, face it, today, we don't buy great big monolithic software. We actually buy a lot of different systems that we can integrate together to make a whole. So especially for those companies that have over 80% of their impact coming from their suppliers, they need to move beyond just measuring to actually helping to change the behavior of their buyers.
And I think you bring up a good point in that, I mean, I've heard about a lot of enterprise software, and I looked at a really interesting, carbon footprint measuring company, but they were doing really customized work, right? So they were doing more consulting work, and I just didn't see how it could scale.
Yeah,
and
right.
So what I think is really interesting about you guys is that you guys are really looking at how are you going to scale this? And we've talked about this as you're starting to move into sort of your, beta or beyond beta, moving towards 1.0 phase, right? Especially using generative AI. So at this point, generative AI is a buzzword that people hate or love. A lot of people don't even understand it. So maybe you could talk a little bit about that and how you're incorporating AI so that it's not just purely analytic and quantitative, but you're really moving towards sort of predictive and, recommendation kind of abilities, right?
Sure, yeah, and so I will apologize. I'm a bit of a geek, so I'm going to geek out here a little bit. There's somebody here. I'm in the Seattle region. There's somebody here that I just love how he talks about AI as not artificial intelligence, but assisted intelligence. And he was developing a system specifically for physicians. So it was crucially important that those physicians didn't think that somebody was thinking they were smarter than them. They needed to be able to see, oh, how is this system actually going to make me smarter? So that's the way I want you to wrap your mind around what we're talking about here. Then from a generative perspective, all that really means is that we're using existing data in order to create new data. And right now it's been primarily text and images. So, we see a lot of the like ChatGPT and that sort of thing is really about how do we use existing data in order to generate new data. So that's what we're doing with ESG, right? There's a lot of companies some companies who have done a really good job of presenting ESG data, and they're transparent about it. And so the question is, how do we use that data in order to create estimates of what some of these smaller companies are doing? And again, this is an on-ramp. This is a way for a company to say, oh, hey, I'm in marketing services company. And I was mentioning the one in Salt Lake City. We also have one in Vancouver, British Columbia. Now, Vancouver, British Columbia has green energy available to them that isn't available to the marketing services company in Salt Lake City to the same level. So when you look at, when you compare their ESG from an industry perspective, again, this is not knowing anything about the company. If you look at them from an industry perspective, they might be very similar because they're similar in size and they're both in North America. But when you look at their environmental impact, that company, just by the fact that they're operating in Vancouver, is going to have a lower environmental impact. So that's the kind of things that we can generate by looking at the data that's available to us around ESG, around where they're located, how many employees they have, what kind of work from home policies, what's their data that they're presenting, if any, around their DE&I, their diversity, equity, and inclusion. I don't know, did I answer that question? Did I make it more confusing?
No, and I also think that, what's interesting is that while there are corporations where they have they may have 1,000 suppliers and 80% of those are going to affect their ESG scores. But at the same time, there's a lot of startups that are starting to come up, and they're all started by, Gen Zers, young millennials that want to have impact. All my interns are like, I want to be a hedge fund person, or I want to be a VC, but I want to help the world and the environment and have impact, right?
Right. But they're in a really great spot though, June, as startups. They get to really build it into their DNA from the very beginning, which I think is a huge opportunity for startups, and they will do that. They can't.
It is, but I think it's hard. I think it's hard. And so what I think is interesting is how you guys are creating a very easy on-ramp. And I think if you could talk about kind of scenarios of besides just corporations, right? I believe there's possibilities for startups and investors, portfolio managers, right? To use this leverage greater impact and value on their portfolios.
Well, absolutely. I mean, I think the more information that you have as you're doing in any kind of investing, of course, it's going to be advantageous to have more information. So if you use, if you're using the 17 ways assessment as a start, that really would give you an advantage as you're thinking about where you want to, put your money, and also what you're attracting in terms of larger clients, right? So if you have a customer a client, for example, that is focused only on, they're saying they only want to focus on gender and they want to focus on climate, it helps you to know who you need to partner with. So it's really about a partnering strategy, I guess, is what I would say to that.
And Lynn, feel free if you have some thoughts about this, about what you're seeing with your private equity clients, to jump in.
Yeah, the private equity work that I'm doing, they are definitely struggling with ESG. And what we're offering to them is, to your point, June, is this on-ramp, because, the private equity space is a very high pressure space. And they're focused on so much on cost savings, obviously, but they're really eager, I think, to integrate these ESG strategies into their work. But again, if you're looking at $100 million company as an example, the ESG world just feels so exclusive to them that our on-ramp of SDG really is important for them.
And they're getting more pressure from their LPs. So
yeah, exactly. They're getting so much pressure.
At this point, I put, Lynn, did you want to add something
No,
to that?
No, the only thing I would add is right there, it's confusing, right? ESG is pretty confusing, and there are a lot, you mentioned EcoVadis, and there are a lot of other platforms. And so trying to figure out what the best platform is for a private equity fund or a company, right? They're all trying to figure it out. And so because there's lots of stuff out there, it's hard to.
Yeah, it is. It's super hard.
At this point, one, I want to open it up for other questions. So if you have a question, I've put myself in galley view so I can see all of you. You can raise your hand and ask a question. And then also, Christiane and Anne, while we're waiting for questions, feel free to bring up other points about, I personally think that everybody should be using 17 ways, but we're working on that. Jose, you have a question. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. It's actually not a question, but one of the things that I hear is a comment, and that is that one of the things that I find useful in the opportunity here with ESGs is that it gives the companies, not only startup companies, but companies that are already established, it gives them the opportunity to really go back and see, well, what is my mission? What am I here for? What is my brand value? What is it that me as a company, the identity of a company, what is it that I'm out to do in the world? Because if you really look at the ESGs, if anyone says, no, there's nothing in it for me, well, there is something in there for you, because it's not only about, when we look at the S, it's not only looking at the social aspect of it within your employees, but also to see, well, what is it that's important to my clients? What is it that's important to my customers? So there is an opportunity here to really look at your brand and say, well, how does my brand fit into this? How does my brand fit into this new reality? Because we are living in a new reality. And mind you, how this whole thing came about within the UN was when Kofi Annan brought in the private sector and started looking at corporate social responsibility. So there is something in it for all of us. Whoever says that there is nothing in it for them, they're lying.
And I think you bring up a really important and good point, is that while everybody's looking for tools, a lot of it goes back to we have to rethink our companies, right? We have to review how a company is going to set its goals and its guidelines and culture, whatever you want to call it, values, for the 21st century, because so many companies are operating from a 20th century lens. Tony, sorry, and Anne or Christiane, if you want to respond to that, and then after that, we'll let Tony.
Jose, to your point, it's all about the brand. Then your brand will drive you. If you really lean into what your brand is and your culture, it will drive you to the right decisions. And that's one of the things that we love about the SDGs, is that usually if your brand is so clear, you can look at the 17 SDGs and know exactly where you should land in terms of the work that you're doing. You know, the whole idea for everything that we're all doing, I think collectively, is we know how much money is spent in B2B transactions, right? Well, you may or may not know, but it's $11 trillion annually, which is a ridiculously, you know, an incredible number. So what we want to do collectively is we want to leverage existing financial systems, right? So existing procurement systems are all doing this. Why can't we make a shift so that we're leveraging the system to create impact? That's really what motivates Kristan and I in the work that we do. Kristan and me, sorry, in the work that we do. Sorry, we were going to
Tony.
Tony.
Hi guys. Just want to thank you all for putting this on, and your knowledge and your work in this space is really impressive, and thanks for sharing. I wanted to ask, we were on some of the platforms earlier, and besides 17 Ways, have you guys come across other good tools? I mean, I know, are there good enterprise solutions on the software side that you think do have a future and a play in the space?
Oof, good question. There's a gap there. There is a B Corp that's put together, it's called Unit of Impact. I'll put a link in there. I don't know, Lynn, if you've run across them, but I think that their work is really interesting.
Yes, great.
Yeah, I put that in the chat.
I mean,
some of the, you know, like your classic procurement platforms are starting to look at putting measures on there, but they're very flawed because, you know, June mentioned at the beginning, you know, carbon offsets and buying carbon credits, like that is such a, that's just putting blinders on the whole issue. And so, you know, I think that there's a lot of confusion that's actually being added when those traditional procurement platforms start to do this. D&I is another one. You know, did you know that because there's some startups here, you can't be certified as a minority or women-owned company once you've got investors that are not minority women-owned. And so you lose your certification. And indeed, a lot of companies are that are certified, like it's not an indicator of the inclusive practices within your company. And so that's why we love the SDGs so much, because it really gets to the heart of what's the impact you're trying to have in the world, and what's the proof that you have, the story you can tell around that impact. And we don't see other software doing that.
and I've been focused on companies that have some impact in the world. We call them, we want to invest in transformative companies. And, you know, I haven't seen a whole lot that are talking, as I said, you know, the full ESG, right? Because ESG, from my understanding, was sort of developed to, you know, help companies be good corporate citizens, right? They're not. There's no teeth on ESG. And so I want to, you know, I'm really interested in, you know, brought 17 Ways into our advisory portfolio. And then soon, I hope when we raise our fund, I hope to invest in them, you know, and have them grow, because I think there's very few companies doing that. So I want to figure out, okay, how can we work with 17 Ways to really add real value, traction, and teeth, right, to ESG. So there is.
We would love that, June. We're looking for a couple more pilots. So if anybody is looking to do this kind of work, we'd love to partner with people.
Yes, please reach out. Also, if you're interested in investing or no investors, you know, they're closing out a quick round, and then we're going to do another round later once we, you know, have a few more pilots under the belt. We have another question from Purity, and she's asking, what impact do you foresee the rise in remote workers having on the adoption and implementation of ESG practices in companies and organizations?
Yeah, oh, sorry.
No, go ahead, Kristan.
Oh, it's an interesting question. I was recently meeting with a sustainability manager at a real estate management company. Like they mostly did like malls, like manage mall real estate and that sort of thing. And she was saying, you know, we put out this beautiful 100-page sustainability report, and then I go to my town hall and I present it to my employees, and none of them know that we're doing any of this.
Yeah.
So I think that there's this opportunity with remote workers, and Anne talked about engagement. Like, there's this opportunity to really engage them in sustainability efforts of a company that I feel like, you know, might be missed if you were all coming into the office. So that's just my instinct. I'm very biased because I've been working remotely since 2001. I think it's the best thing, and I think that it really allows you to really focus your efforts, provide points of engagement, and really get employees to start helping you achieve those ESG goals. And sorry, you go ahead.
Well, I'm just basically too, with fewer people driving and getting needed transportation to get to work, it's certainly having an impact on the E in ESG. But I think it's I do think there's a price to be paid on the S in ESG relative to employee engagement. So Christine sees it one way, but I sort of missed the idea of this personal engagement. And so then it could impact culture, and then culture impacts everything. But I think we've yet to, we have, there's a lot to be learned in that space.
But I also think it's not either or, right?
Because hybrid
choice
apparently
value, right? And I think what we're not, you know, HR people, future work, they're all like trying to figure out, you know, what is the future going to be now that we're coming out of remote work. But increasingly, you know, people are saying, I want choice, right? And choice has a very real value to them, right? And it's really informing their decisions. Purity is also asking, can you please tell us more about the role of the pilots that partner with you?
Oh, I love this question.
it.
Because I'm a designer. I'm very much around human-centered design, and it's all about engaging, you know, the people that I'm designing for. So we've done design sprints with our partners to really talk with various of your employees and figure out. I mean, it's your opportunity really to help guide us to ensure that we're delivering what you need in order to make the change for ESG impact you want to have in your business. So we want you to come look at our software, you know, talk to us, you know, we'll do some interviews and really understand like what's underneath the human motivation for your employees to adopt sustainability, and how can we ensure that we deliver it in our platform.
And, you know, what 17 Ways is doing is they're building AI, right? And the future AIs, which can be predictive, generative, all of those kind of AIs, they need pilots, right?
Data.
And data to really learn, right? AIs, like young children, they need to learn, and they need inputs to learn. And that's why we send kids to school. And so it's the same thing with AI. And I think that the pilots and the data are really important for making sure that what 17 Ways is building, and they're going to evolve because they're early stage startup, is really responsive to the needs of their users, their customers. I have another company and in our portfolio that's shifting, and they're a transportation data company. And, you know, part of it is, as she's looking at transportation data, she said, even my assumptions, I realize, are not what I expected, right? Once she started looking at the data. So anybody else have a question?
There's a question about B Corp. I think that would be a good one for you, Anne.
Yeah, well, we certainly don't, we love B Corps, we are B Corp. We certainly don't compete with B Lab in any way. we bring in on our platform, we have, we highlight the B Corp certification. So a company that has a B Corp certification is going to be getting a higher rating with us as you look at it. So we would be thrilled to work more closely with all of the B Corps and have a great relationship with them at this point. So yeah, we would absolutely highlight them, and they'll have the B impact assessment is fantastic, and we use that as well. We use that as we built out our assessment, but it's not, ours is not, doesn't have nothing has the what I would say the rigor that B Lab has in their assessment, because most companies can't really even become a B Corp. It takes a long time, and it's really, really hard to do.
So
And we were talking about data. Sorry, just really quick, June. We are pulling in the B impact assessment data into our AI. So you can see that as an example of when June was talking about predictive. Here's where you can get to if you implement some of these things, and those predictions are being driven by some of the B impact data that we can pull in.
since somebody's asking about B Corp, and I learned from you guys, for benefit and B Corps are two different things. Can you talk about that very quickly and what's involved in the difference, right?
It sort of depends on, first of all, there's the B Corp, becoming B Corp certified is you go through B Lab and take the B impact assessment, and you have to score to a certain degree, get recertified every couple of years. To be a benefit corp is simply, it's very simple. It's state by state. Not every state has it. Ohio does not have it. But you can change from being a C Corp to being a benefit corp, and then your reporting requirements are different. But there's nobody's checking you to make sure going in that you're actually doing great things. You have to report on that after the fact.
And a key part of the
things.
Yeah, and a key part of the B Corp certification is showing a B impact business model. So you actually have to have impact built into your business model. Whether it's we give X percent of our profits to this, or we match every one purchases to something else. Or for us, our B impact business model is all around helping startups and small businesses build their sustainability.
But benefit corps are great because it's again, it's sort of a way into the B Corp world, but becoming a benefit corporation is a good thing to do as a step one. And
I think it really messages out that you have a focus, right?
Absolutely.
On really working towards certain goals. So before we end, as we said, 17 Ways is looking for pilots and some early investors. But let's talk about pilots. Can you talk a little bit more in detail about what kind of pilots you're looking for, what's involved in being a pilot, and how quickly they could get onboarded if they do that? What's involved?
Yeah, I mean, the way we would start, the way we like to start is to really look at the company's goals. We do love working with large enterprise companies, but we need to have some smaller companies that we're piloting with. Because we haven't done that. We've only worked with large companies on the one side, but then we work with suppliers across the board. So we would begin by looking at a group of suppliers, doing an assessment for those suppliers, doing a baseline, and then working together to create targets for your suppliers. Additionally, we'd map out a plan of how do you get your suppliers to get to a higher level in terms of their impact. Christine, you want to add to that?
Well, and I'm posting, that for enterprise suppliers, or sorry, buyers. That's great. I am also posting. You can take our SDG assessment for free, and we'll create a report for you. So I put that in the chat. We'd love to see more people do this, and we'd love to hear your feedback.
Yeah,
So, anybody feel free to go over and do that and just get a sort of read. As Anne was saying, you'll find there's like 3 to 5 of those SDGs that are attuned with your brand and will really help you accentuate how you're having this impact in the world.
yeah, and you can use the assessment and put it in RFPs, because so many more RFPs now are asking for, what are you doing in the world of sustainability and ESG? So we have people that just take the assessment and put a link in the RFP, and they've gotten great response to that. It's great for social media. It's really good for your website. So I would really encourage you to take the our SDG assessment.
Okay. We are at time, so I'm gonna leave it. And before we end, I want to give Christiane and Anne any last comments, and I want to thank everybody for coming.
Yeah.
We did record this session, so we'll make that available, and we will be sharing it also with our networks. And Christiane?
Thank you. No, just wonderful to see everyone. June, thank you for hosting us. It was really great. Good conversation and great to see all these faces.
And thank you for all the hard work you're doing out in the world to help, our planet and society and inclusiveness. Like I'm feeling the love. So thank you so much.
Okay. With that,